Once there was a student studying under a great teacher, but the teacher always insisted that the student must practice his breathing in order to meditate properly. Who cannot learn the little things cannot learn the great things, he said. Every day from the first moment of teaching to the last, the teacher made the student practice his breathing. This went on for many months. Finally, the student went to the teacher to complain. "Teacher," he said, "I'm tired with this breathing in and out. It is so boring. I think it is time for me to learn something that is actually interesting for a change." The teacher reflected for a moment and then nodded. "Sometimes, perhaps, it is necessary to learn something interesting. Come with me to the river." They went out to the river. The teacher then grabbed the student by his neck and held his head under the water while the student struggled. Finally, when it seemed as if the student might drown, he let him up, gasping and sputtering and choking for air. "There, isn't breathing in and out interesting for a change?" asked the teacher. "Now practice your breathing." And now, may the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts grant us not only the light of wisdom to understand these words, but the fire of conviction, that we might be people that put them into practice. Amen. Happy Sunday, March 10th, 2024, Mosaic. I am Reverend Ben Collins. As usual, I'm thrilled to be here with you all, grateful for the invitation from Judy. As always, glad to have her sharing leadership as liturgist this week. Judy and I have been friends for a long time, going on a decade, I think, maybe a little less or a little more. And we share a lot of similar interests, as I'm sure many of you do. She and I share similar interests in theology, spirituality, religious community, and all that sort of stuff. So I wasn't surprised to learn that she had stumbled upon the same book, Breath, by James Nestor. And I learned that she was so moved by the book that she wrote what I think is maybe her only fan letter. And Judy, I hope I'm not oversharing. I only share that to say that we had a similar enthusiasm for what the book told us, and maybe more so what it did to us. So this morning, I would like to talk about practicing our breathing. I want to give you a brief summary of what I thought was a crucial insight from this book, Breath. I want to make a connection to spirituality and spiritual practice, and then invite us to do just that, to practice, or maybe into a handful of some kind of specific practices that I've actually been using and employing daily since reading the book, which has been, I can't remember when Judy and I first messaged about it. It's been months and months now. And I want to engage these practices on their own as helpful for breathing. That's sort of what the book is about. But then I also want to take a look at them symbolically as guides for our practice. So let's dive in. The book Breath, again, James Nestor, the book sets out to resolve the author's sleep apnea. He discovers that much of modern human trouble with breathing is actually related to the effectiveness with which we have subverted evolution since really the agricultural revolution. You may be wondering, what does that mean? To summarize, people stopped having to work hard for our food, right? Like chasing animals and all that stuff, hunting and gathering. But then also we stopped having to work hard for our food chewing, literally, hours a day. Instead, we opted for agricultural porridge, soft, mealy foods, cooked and boiled proteins and steamed veggies. And over time, the absence of this jaw exercise led our faces to droop and elongate, right? That all that chewing, that musculature naturally made our faces a little more like animals, more like a snout, right? A little more forward, a little more strength and musculature in the jaw. And so as we softened our food, our faces drooped and elongated. The important airway construction inside the face also began to droop and collapse backwards, right? Our faces sort of fell and flattened. Fast forward to modern times, where nightly my dad dresses as Darth Vader, and maybe many of you do. I and maybe some of you, we struggle for our lives while we sleep. And though there is no assailant, we fight for breath against our own evolutionary laziness. And please don't understand this as a value judgment. Absolutely not. I'm offering some humorous commentary, but this is really just reporting on the evolution of human breathing in the last, let's say, 500 years. Prior to the agricultural revolution, the softening of the human palate, the gift of cooking, there weren't present in the historical or fossil records of human skulls the kind of symptoms like modern sleep apnea. We did the smart thing, right? We used our huge brains instead of our big jaws, right? And our big spear-throwing muscles. We worked smarter, not harder. We domesticated livestock and agriculture so that we wouldn't have to work as hard to feed ourselves. And so what happened is, at the same time, this let our brains grow at an exponential rate as they received more nourishment, more quickly, less effort. And then it was just a matter of progress, right? We were off to the races. We got better and better at making it easier and easier. And now I can't get my 9-year-old son to eat anything other than chicken tenders and French fries and macaroni and cheese and pizza. I mean, he may never know the gift of chewing a leathery piece of meat for 90 seconds to keep the chef happy. Oh no, it's good. It's really good. Is this that Wagyu beef? So what? There's the obvious question of whether or not and how we can address or fix some of our problems with breathing. The thesis of the book is that yes, we can. There are some things you can do which span the spectrum from entry-level daily breathing exercises to the kind of extreme breathing practices and retreats. I mean, you're talking about elevating body temperature and being able to start fire with your breath. And, I probably wouldn't go that far. I don't know that I'm going to be considering those. But what I want to do is just give you a few practices that I really appreciated from sort of the end of the book and that I've kind of taken forward and adapted and sort of used on my own. But before we get there, I want to make a connection philosophically and theologically between the way we've struggled evolutionarily and developmentally with breathing, and what I see to be a parallel in evolution and in the development of spirituality. And to do this, I want us to make the jump from literal aspiration, right? This is the book Breath, to mystical inspiration. And this is eventually going to be my book called Chew, right? Breath and Chew. And the two basic ideas are this: our breath suffers when we make it too easy. And when we work harder, we breathe better, right? So that's idea number one. And similarly, so that's with breath. And at the same time, our spirituality suffers when we make it too easy. And when we practice, we experience better inspiration. So the summary, whether it's breath or spirituality, the summary is this: the easier we make it on ourselves, the sicker we get. And the more we work it, the better we get, right? And anyone who's been in or around recovery communities for any amount of time knows that this is one of the mantras that we walk away with every time we meet, is that it works if you work it. It works if you work it. You hear the chewing there? It works if you work it. When it comes to the spiritual equivalent of chewing, for me, and I come out of the Judeo-Christian tradition, I'll name that, but for me, the spiritual equivalent of chewing is wrestling with God. working out your faith, deconstruction, the dark night of the soul. We're talking about working on your faith, working on your spirituality. We're talking about consistency, putting in the chew time. The gurus and yogis and mystics have always called it practice, discipline, or simply the way, a form of life. But in modern times, in the same way that we dumb down food so soft that we can't breathe, right? We've also dumbed down spirituality so soft, so spoon-fed, so echo chamber and algorithm appetite specific that people can't resist the spoon feeding. They can't resist the milkshake religion, the stadium tour spirituality, so palatable to the masses because it actually does taste better. It does go down smoother and sweeter. And yes, it's nutritionally very empty. We might say it's just all too goddamn easy. And don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying life is easy. Absolutely not. Nobody understands life to be easy. I'm saying these easy answer theologies that offer all the answers that we didn't really ever ask for, and they ask nothing of us in terms of forging and engaging a spirituality for ourselves that is real, that's authentic, that changes. The modern religious buffet makes us weak, and we end up choking, and this is one of the biggest insights for me. We end up choking not on the poison, but on the self. Right? Sleep apnea isn't choking on soft foods. It's choking on our own self, our own throat. And I think that has spiritual applications too, right? We don't choke on our poison. We don't choke on our sins. We choke on what it does to the self. Our own body restricts our inspiration, right? The self restricts. And the world's traditions are full of examples of the folly of laziness and lack of discipline in the spiritual life. And similarly full of encouragement and admonition to practice, to challenge, to wrestle, to struggle, to work out one's own faith. In the Hebrew Bible, we find this profound picture of the spiritual life in the story of Jacob wrestling with God on the shores of the Jabbok River all night. And Jacob leaves with a wound and a new name. A wound and a new name. And the name is sort of a Hebrew way of saying a new charge, a new task, a new mission. The wound is evidence of wrestling with God. He wrestled with God and he made it out alive. And the name actually means wrestled with God or wrestles with God, like an ongoing wrestling. God gives Jacob a name. He changes Jacob's name. And the name he gives him isn't good boy who listened and didn't argue and believed everything in Sunday school and hated who Fox News told him to hate. He was a good boy. The name that defines the people of God is wrestles with God. How great is that? I mean, think about it. That's a serious commitment. That's like a marriage, right? And I don't, any of you have been divorced. I couldn't stay married, but because marriage isn't let's stay together until it gets tough. Marriage is a commitment to wrestle, to fight instead of walk away. Is there evidence in our spiritual lives that we've been chewing, right? That we've been wrestling with God? Right? Is there evidence? Have we got a wounded hip somewhere that we've been wrestling? And I'm talking about wrestling with the church. Hell, we've all got wounds from the church. I'm talking about, are you wrestling with God, with your own spirituality, with your own true self? And then similarly with the name, if we were to reevaluate our name, right? And maybe it's you and your personal thing. Maybe we talk about our congregation, right? Mosaic. We reevaluate our task, our charge. It is the mission of our spirituality, of our spiritual community. If we were to ask as a congregation, what's our name, right? And the symbol there is, what's our task? What's our charge? What are we here to do? Is it to work hard and to chew down on this spirituality and this practice? Or is it really to shore up and reaffirm decisions we've made and sort of values we're already comfortable with. I mean, and again, no shade. I'm with you. I mean, how many of us ended up Unitarian because we went to churches who didn't want us to wrestle? They wouldn't let us ask questions. And we finally went, you know what, we can't put up with that. We know wrestling is a part of the thing. It's intuitive to us in our spirituality. But then even in the Unitarian Church, and again, I'm not casting judgment. I did this for a decade with Collective Church, very progressive, right? Even in these communities where chewing and wrestling is encouraged, we still can get comfortable with how easy it is and how convenient it all is and how good it all tastes and how sort of palatable it all is to be surrounded with people who agree, to be the ones with the open minds, right? Which is beautiful, but our spirituality does not thrive long-term this way. Like our aspiration, our inspiration works best when we take the time to chew, to break it down, to roll it around and taste it, and process it. The more we chew, the better we breathe. The more we practice, the better the inspiration. And what might we chew, right? What are we wrestling down? I'm glad you asked. Right, if chewing is the exercise, the spiritual practice, and I did after getting the book, I got a little chew block. I don't know if Judy took it that far, but I got a chew block, right? And I'm exercising my jaw. I worked my way up from blue to purple to black. That's the heaviest resistance. But what are we chewing? I took that literally. And maybe it's helping my breath. I feel good. I'm also doing nasal spray, so maybe that's helping. But like I'm doing the exercise, I'm chewing. I like to think that the wrestling of faith and the chewing of spirituality are the methods by which we form and evaluate and purify and transform our relationship with the divine. Again, from recovery, our conscious contact with the God of our understanding, the deepest resonance of our true self, our own spirit. Sometimes in wrestling with God, we will discover or add things to our perspective on God, and that is beautiful. More often, I find, especially with people in our stage of life or later, I found that my wrestling and chewing is where I actually eliminate and put down and unshackle myself from versions of God that have harmed me or people I love or no longer serve me. You guys are Unitarians. You know this practice better than anyone. The practice of not believing in gods that no longer serve us. Right? The practice of not believing in gods that hurt us or ask us to be less than human or ask us to hate people. Letting go of one view of God, right? Chewing until you realize, maybe that's a bone or is that some gristle or is that some fat? Like I really am not supposed to be consuming that and certainly not taking that into myself. Letting go of one view of God doesn't mean letting go of God. At least it doesn't have to. And maybe it does for some people, and you know what, that's okay too. It might simply mean we're ready for a more expansive understanding of God. I'm not sure I believe in God anymore. It means we've outgrown one set of theological clothes and we're ready for another. Maybe to use the food metaphor, we've outgrown ketchup and we're ready to experiment with some deeper flavor profiles. Meister Eckhart, the 13th century Christian mystic, often prayed, God, rid me of God. That's a really good prayer for chewing. God, rid me of God. So, right, I've got my breathing block for chewing, and then I've got this prayer, God, rid me of God, that I can sort of chew anytime I'm wanting to add some strength to my practice. And for Eckhart, this was, God, rid me of limited ideas, limited images, limited concepts about God, which constrain my understanding of divine reality, that constrain my conscious contact with the source. I mean, theologically, Eckhart sought to outgrow wherever he happened to be. He wasn't trying to grow somewhere. He was trying to outgrow wherever it is that he was. We're not meant to sit under a palm tree in paradise and not question, not struggle, not grow, not mature. Growth is the challenge of faith. Growth is another name of discipleship, or the path, or the way, or enlightenment. Growth requires chewing. It requires wrestling. It requires working it. The father of centering prayer says, find a teacher, find a community, and find a practice. You got to commit yourself to chew. So in the book, Breath, he lands on some practices. And I honestly can't remember if he really lists them or even says them like this, but this is what I took away. And I feel like I can give it to you. Take what you like. If not, leave it. I've adopted, I'm not going to dive into detail on the rationale for how these are going to fix your breathing. But the 4 things that I now say at the end of my daily mantra, and so now this is, we're talking about months and months and months. At the very end, I say, shut your mouth, breathe through your nose, exhale, breathe less. Shut your mouth, breathe through your nose, exhale, breathe less. So practice number 1, shut your mouth. When it comes to improving your breathing in your mouth, shutting your mouth forces to breathe through your nose, which we learned throughout the book is better breathing. I'll talk about that in a second. But spiritually speaking, shutting your mouth means we're listening. Even better, it means shutting our mouth may leave us available to moments of silence. What the guru has called solitude. And so we shut our mouths. That's step 1. And the way he says to do it, which is really quite peaceful, you shut your mouth and you don't have your teeth even really together. They're just sort of hovering apart. Your tongue right there, sort of between your teeth, to the point where it's comfortable. So we shut our mouths. Step 1. Step 2, practice 2. Breathe through your nose. So just do that with me. When it comes to improving our breathing, again, better breathing because the nose, for a lot of reasons, is the better place to breathe. Better, it's got a filter, it changes the temperature of air. It's designed for breathing in a way that the mouth isn't. Spiritually speaking, breathing through the nose represents breathing on purpose. It takes a consciousness, it takes an intention. Do that again, take a couple breaths, just through your nose. Don't breathe through your mouth. Our inspiration is asking for that same intention and consciousness as we can give our breath. To give it that focus, to take a minute to have to think about it. Practice number 3, exhale. Part of what we learn in the book about problems with breathing is that it's not only about getting enough air in, it's about trouble getting the stale air out. And as you can imagine, when it comes to spirituality, we can find ourselves holding on to all sorts of stale inspiration, afraid that we might not know where the next fresh breath will come from. A healthy spirituality trusts that another breath is coming and that the best thing for our inspiration is to exhale what is no longer vital. Finally, he invites us to breathe less. When we intentionally breathe less, we can become aware that we need less breath, and that's actually a good thing, that with a little intention and a little practice, we find that less breath actually translates to less stress, moving through life less like we're drowning or hyperventilating, less extremes like lungs all the way full or all the way empty. What if we can just learn to breathe peacefully in the middle? There are spiritual traditions that say when the justice of God comes, the mountains will be lowered and the valleys will be raised. They'll find this level. What if breathing is what levels those streams and mountains of energy? Like breathing, spirituality is already true of you. Like breathing, spirituality is both autonomic and voluntary. It happens even if you don't think about it. but it can happen even more vividly when you engage it with intention. Like breathing, spirituality is shaped by our practice. Like breathing, unless we chew, unless we wrestle, unless we work it, we'll get sick and weak and malformed in our musculature for spiritual life. So as we take stock again and take responsibility again for our faith and the impact that it has on the world, may we commit ourselves to the gift of chewing, to doing the work of spiritual formation, discipline, and direction, so that we can be people vitally inspired for the work of a just and beautiful world. I love you, Mosaic. Amen.